Chapter 14, Computer Simulation in Healthcare by Sean Carr and Stephen Roberts from North Carolina State University. This is a summary of the chapter from the textbook Handbook of Healthcare Delivery Systems, and I'll be summarizing their chapter. We're now moving into the section of this textbook where it looks more at models in healthcare. And because mathematical models don't translate as well to the spoken word, and the fact that I don't understand math models, these summaries will be reasonably brief and to the point. Also, it's worth pointing out that this book was published in 2010, and so I'm sure that the methods and application of computer simulation in healthcare has evolved quite significantly since publication. The book starts by wondering why healthcare uses simulation and looks at computer simulation as a means to run experiments. And it's helpful because, quote, healthcare delivery systems have many random components, and these components interact in many complex ways, end quote. And so the hope is that simulation can help understand the randomness of healthcare. And it's also difficult to model because, unlike other industries where you may have widgets or machines which are a lot more structured and standardized in the way you think about their interactions, in healthcare, what you model is on the consumer side, human behavior, people, such as patients, and on the, quote, server side, you also model people, which are the nurses, the doctors, and the various healthcare workers. And so because you're trying to model a system that involves people on both sides of the equation, that just adds to the complexity. And of course, the book also says computer simulation is very different from healthcare simulation, because when we think of healthcare simulation, that's actually using mannequins and dummies to trying to create real-world physical environments to practice safety and procedures in, which is entirely not what we're talking about today. Quite a lot of simulation of healthcare has been done primarily in emergency departments, looking at wait times, length of stay, staffing, and patient flow. And outside of the emergency room, a lot of the models are used to really look at operational models in hospitals and clinics, trying to figure out patient scheduling, operations, and scheduling for clinicians. Simulation is also helpful outside of institutional modeling to try to predict population health issues, such as the spread of infectious disease, pandemics, hospital evacuations, and bioterrorism. When we go into the second part where we actually look at trying to create a simulation model, the chapter proposes 5 steps. The first, the system definition, and the second, the development of the conceptual model. Getting these 2 parts are correct because if you don't understand the system properly, and if you choose the wrong model, essentially the rest is useless. Step 3 is the actual creation of the simulation program. Step 4 is the creation of the numerical results. And then 5 is the final recommendations. And the key part about the final recommendations is that the results have to appear valid to the stakeholders. And really the only way to do this is to join the actual modeler with subject matter experts during this process so that you can have continuous feedback from people who understand the issue. If you have modelers alone go out and try to create healthcare simulations, they won't be of much value. When we want to do a simulation, though, we need data. And getting good data is actually also part of the hardest part. We have lots of healthcare financial data, but we actually do not have very much performance data. And so trying to collect more performance data is a crucial part of developing healthcare systems. And we've talked about this in previous chapters, about really the blight of good performance data to help do proper quality assessment. The chapter discusses different types of models, and at the end, one of the key things they discuss is most of the models they use are not standard normal distributions, but in fact ones which might have tails longer to the right. So really finding the right model to look at something is crucial. And a lot of the things that they need to simulate don't actually have proper distributional models. And this is, for instance, if we're looking at arrival processes, this is a random process, and it changes randomly with time, and it's just important to consider. Ultimately, you'll choose a simulation package, you'll choose a model, and then you'll go in to do the actual simulation. There's 6 different simulation models which they discuss. The first is a Monte Carlo simulation that the text describes as a way to model random behavior and the ways that variables interact with each other randomly, suggesting that these, quote, single-period inventory problems, such as the number of transporters required in a hospital on a certain day, the number of surgical suites to be built in a new facility, or the number of spaces in a parking lot, can be used for Monte Carlo. The second is discrete event simulation, where they try to use time sequential events, where you may have a similar workflow, such as a process mapping project, that could be useful for discrete event simulation. The third is object-oriented simulation, and in this case, each object, such as a nurse or a doctor, has their interactions and connections with the other objects modeled. Systems dynamic modeling may take the way that multiple systems interact with each other, both with positive and negative feedback loops. For instance, if you are looking at the emergency room usage, you can see how this is affected by either increasing or decreasing the insurance population, the uninsured population, and the cost of treatment. You could also use systems dynamic modeling to look at ways to model the spread of disease. And last, the book looks at agent-based modeling, where the agent or the person or people are modeled in the way that they interact both independently as also in social groups, such as using swarming, flocking behavior. And so this is useful for understanding emergency planning or the impact of screening policies for diabetic retinopathy, apparently. We'll move into the next few chapters, which look at some more models in detail.